That time? Yes. And you were asked a lot of questions about the lighting and the identification, were you not? Yes. And at that time, do you remember being asked how long a look you had the first time that you saw this person when he turned around and looked at the person with the bandana? Yes. Do you remember at that time saying that it was 30 seconds and not a minute? I believe I said 30 to 60 seconds. I would call the court's attention to the preliminary hearing transcript, page 5, line 26. All right, yes. Just a moment. Okay, proceed. Do you remember being asked the question, for what period of time were you able to see the person clearly at that point? At the beginning stages of your testimony. Yes, and you said, I would say it was about 30 seconds. Yes, and it's your testimony now today that it was a minute. Well, if you read on further in the transcript, you'll note that I did say 60 seconds from there on out. Where is this page? Page 5, line 26. Okay, just a second. And your initial testimony early on in the transcript it was 30 seconds, is that correct? Yes. And did you tell the police that you did not get a good look at him? Yes. Now, when the incident happened in the driveway, you indicated that there were these lights by the 5 apartments and the lights on the other side of the fence. Those are all a yellow kind of a light, are they not? Yes. They're a muted kind of light. Would you say it's a very light gold colored glass? It's not a dark yellow. They're not a glaring light like a street light. It's not glaring like a street light, no. They're muted so that they don't invade into the privacy of everyone's house? No. I would object to the form of the question as being argumentative. Overruled. These are lights that are out in front of every door, yes, and along the bins. And when you turned around and looked at this person in the back seat, there was no light on in the car, was there? No. And at that time, you did not see any gun, did you? I just looked at his face. Did you ever see a gun? No. No. And the car then went into the back in the garage area, and that was a very dark area, was it not? Yes, very dark. And then the car left from the back area and went down to the bank. Is that correct? Yes. Now, in the course of the trip down to the bank, you were in the back seat? Yes. And you were laying on your stomach, were you? Yes. And your head was on the passenger or the driver's side, the passenger side. And it was on the way back from the bank that you said that you had another look at this person. I looked at him while we were leaving the bank. And that was at the time that you were in the back seat, on your stomach still. Is that correct? Yes. And your head was toward the passenger door. Is that correct? Yes. And you looked across the car at the driver. Is that correct? My head was turned originally at the driver. You were still laying down though? Yes. And this person was driving the vehicle at that time? Yes. And at that time, you say that you saw this person for a minute. Is that correct? Yes. Now, do you think on that look that it was less than a minute? All I could do is my best estimate. I wasn't exactly watching my watch to see. Do you remember that you were asked that question at the preliminary hearing? Yes. Turning to the court's attention to page 44, lines 14 through 20. Line 14 or line 12? Line 12, all right. Do you remember being asked, could you estimate for me how long you were looking at him that first time? Referring to when you were pulling out of the parking lot, the bank. Do you recall being asked that question? Yes. And do you remember answering it was about a minute? Yes. And then do you remember answering it was between maybe 30 seconds to 60? I can't remember exactly. It seems like a while. Do you remember giving that answer? Yes. So it could have been 30 seconds that you looked at him. It could have been 30 seconds, 40 seconds, 50 seconds, 55. All I know is a long period of time. It seemed like a long period of time? Yeah. Now, at the time that you were laying on the back seat and looking across at the driver who was also driving and manipulating the car, I gather, yes, there was no interior lights on in the car. Is that correct? No. And you could only see the right profile of this person. Is that correct? Yes. And the only other time that you had occasion to look at this person was, I believe you said on Central and West line. Yes. And that was for a brief couple of seconds, about 20 seconds. And that was also the right profile. Yes. And that was as he was driving down the street. He was driving down on Otis. And I was watching him, and I watched him while he turned. And then once he turned, I stopped watching him. He turned his head back. At no time were the interior lights on in the vehicle. No, there were just street lights along there. So you were passing between street lights and areas where there were no street lights, is that correct? It's all very well lit, all along there. When you say all along there, on both sides of the street, which street? On Otis, all right. And on Westline by the park, all right. And all the lighting is outside of the car? Yes. So that when the person jumped up from the back seat, you got a look at this person, you say. You did not see the person driving to the back of the area, to the garage area, is that correct? No, I did not. And in your going into the back seat of the car, you did not look at this person, is that correct? No. And in laying on the back seat, when the car pulled out of the driveway, you did not look at this person, is that correct? No. And in traveling down the street to the bank, you did not look at this person, is that correct? Correct. And at the bank, other than those two incidents after Westline, you did not look at this person, is that correct? I did look at him again on Central. After Central, excuse me. I did not look at him after Central, no. And when you went to the teller and you got the money, you did not look at this person when you gave him the money, is that correct? Correct. When you gave him the money from your purse and handed it to the back of you, you did not look at this person, is that correct? Correct. Now, you talked to an officer, Fuentes, I believe, on August 29, is that correct? Yes. And you gave him a description of the person that had been your attacker. I was not in any shape to give him an accurate description. You talked about going to the hospital. You did not have any bruises or scars or broken bones or anything, did you? No. You went for a rape kit analysis? Yes. And that's when they just took samples from you? Yes. Now you had talked, did you talk to the officer twice? I don't understand. Did you talk to the officer twice that night in giving him a description or once? He was in and out of the room a couple of times while the doctor and the nurses came in. And then he would come back for the report. Is it fair to say that there was nothing remarkable about this person? Nothing unusual that stood out above all the characteristics? Now, the only thing unusual is what he did to me, and the characteristics I could never forget. Nothing, no pronounced lisp. He had a very soft voice, talked uneducated, what? He talked as if he was very uneducated in kind of a slang. Would you say that was a typical way of talking? Have you heard somebody talk like that before? I grew up in Oakland and I've heard the lingo, so there was nothing remarkable? No. Showing you what has been marked, I believe it's up there, the composites on both 18 and 19. This is a fair representation of the way his hair was that night, yes. This is fairly accurate in your mind, yes. Now, when you talked to the officer that night, did you tell him that this person had a scar? No. So if he made a note of a scar, that would be wrong. Yes, because I did not mention it that night. You didn't mention that there was a scar on the left side of the face? No. At this time, we're going to take a recess. Be in recess until 1/4 I want to admonish you that it is your duty not to converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with the trial, or to form or express any opinion thereon until the case is finally submitted to you. We'll be in recess. All right, the record will reflect the defendant and both counsel are present. Please proceed. Thank you. Going back to the question I asked you before we took the break, did you tell the officer that he had a scar covering part of his face? No, I said there was a scarf covering part of his face from the nose down. And you talked to a Sergeant McGrath when you did the drawings, is that correct? Yes. And you described the person to Sergeant McGrath as 5'7" to 5'9", approximately, and clean-shaven? Yes. You have described this person continuously as with no mustache? I could not see any mustache. No sideburns? No sideburns. No beard? No beard. No goatee? No goatee. Now, you mentioned something about a slit in the eyebrow? Yes. Which eyebrow was that? The left eyebrow. The left eyebrow. And is that what you would describe as a slit? Is that represented in the composite drawing? No. This is something that, strike that. Did you describe the slit in the eyebrow to Officer Fuentes? No. Did you tell that to Sergeant McGrath when he did the composite? No. Did you testify to that at the preliminary hearing in November? Yes, I did. May we approach a moment, Your Honor? Yes, thank you. All right, proceed. Ms. Wade, have you had an opportunity to read over the preliminary hearing transcript? Yes. Showing you, do we want to mark this? I don't know how the court, what's here? 76 pages. Do you recognize this? Yes, I do. When you look through the transcript as to your testimony, as to the portion where you testified about the slit in the eyebrow, okay, it's on page 54, which are the lines, line 13. The court reporter left out what I said. I would object at this point. Just a second. Page 54, line 13. And prior to reading that, let me ask you this. Is it in the transcript? No, the court reporter left it off. It's your testimony that the court reporter has left it off? Yes. There's also another discrepancy in here too. So it is not in the transcript? No. And it is not something that you mentioned to Officer Fuentes. Is that correct? No, I did not. And it is not something that you mentioned to Sergeant McGrath in doing the composite. Is that correct, Your Honor? It's been asked and answered. Sustained, I'm sorry. And prior to reading that, let me ask you this. Is it in the transcript? No, the court reporter left it off. It's your testimony that the court reporter has left it off? Yes, there's also another discrepancy in here too. So it is not in the transcript? No. And it is not something that you mentioned to Officer Fuentes. Is that correct? No, I did not. And it is not something that you mentioned to Sergeant McGrath in doing the composite. Is that correct? Your Honor, it's been asked and answered. Sustained, I'm sorry, this is cross-examination. Overruled. Is that correct? Is it not something you mentioned to Sergeant McGrath? No, but I didn't remember it until I saw him. When you were doing the composite with Sergeant McGrath, he had all these eyes sort of spread out for you to pick out? Yes. And eyebrows? Yes. And noses and chins? Yes. And you focused on each part of the face, is that correct? Separately, yes. Now this occurred on August 29, I believe, is that correct? Yes. And it was not until September 21 that you were asked to come down and look at some photos, is that correct? Yes. And in the meantime, you had gone back to work and gone about your life? No. Had you returned to work for a few days only? And when you went down and looked at the photos, which have been marked as plaintiffs 1, you looked at them in a room of the Alameda Police Department? Yes. And you looked at them by yourself? Yes. Nobody else was in the room with you? No. Was it Officer Garrett who asked you to come down and look at the photos? I suppose it was him. I really don't remember. Now, you mentioned to Officer Garrett that there were some things that were quite different from this photo than the person you remembered over 3 weeks ago? Yes. You mentioned that number 1, his hair was, as you have described it, twisted? Yes. Number 2, that the person in the photo had a mustache. Is that correct? Yes. And number 3, that the person had a beard? Yes. And that the person did not apparently strike them. Now, those 3 things you mentioned, also that he was younger in that picture. So the person in the photo was younger than the person that you remembered that night? Yes. You assumed that the picture was an old picture? Yes. And that, in fact, were the person really the age that he is in the picture, it would be considerably younger than the person who had attacked you. I don't understand your question. You testified that you assumed that the picture was an old picture and the person was 2 or 3 years younger than your attacker. No, I didn't assume. Now, that picture was taken a few years ago. Just a moment. I've got to see counsel in chambers for a moment. I'm sorry to interrupt. Pardon me. Thank you. The record will reflect the defendant and both counsel are present. All members of the jury panel are present. Please proceed. Okay, are we ready? 225. Okay, today is Tuesday, 10/11. This is a 225 for voice for 5 minutes. We are starting off with cross-examination by plaintiff's attorney. Plaintiff's attorney is Mr. Williams. Williams. Defense attorney, Mr. Aid, AID. Felix, Felix. Raymond, Raymond. Johnny, Johnnny. Felix Ayala, Ayala. Marilyn, Marilyn. Mr. Gonzalez, Gonzalez. Okay. 225. Question question by plaintiff's attorney. Sir, you said that after you heard the shots, you did see Felix with a gun in his hand, did you not? Yes, sir, I did. And you assumed that it was Felix that shot Raymond, isn't that correct? Yes, sir. After you saw Felix with the gun in his hand, you said he was slouched over the wall. Yes, he was, sir. Did you see somebody take the gun from his hand? I believe I did, sir, yes. Who did you see take the gun from his hand? Johnny Herrera. Did you ever see Felix take the gun back at any time? Not that I recall, no. And was Felix loaded that day or under the influence or that evening just before the shots rang out? Yes, he was, sir. He was pretty loaded. Would you say that he was, of all the people at the party, he was under the influence or loaded or drunk more than anybody else? Yes, sir. He was drunker than Raymond, was he not? Yes, sir. Did you see any drugs, any reds at the party in anybody's possession? Not there, I didn't, sir. Earlier I did. You saw some drugs earlier? Yes, sir. Where did you see drugs earlier? At Johnny Herrera's house. Did you see any in Felix's possession? Yes, I did. Did you see Felix take any drugs? Yes, I did. Or what you believed to be drugs, is that correct? Yes. They were red capsules, is that correct? Yes, they appeared to be red capsules. You met Felix approximately what time of the day or evening? I met him in the evening when I arrived at Johnny's approximately at 8:30, 9 o'clock. That was the first time you had ever met Felix Ayala in your life? Yes, sir. And did you ever see Felix involved in any arguments of any kind that night? No, sir, I didn't. Did Felix mention anything about a bicycle or argue with anybody about a bicycle at any time? No, sir, not that I remember. When you were at Johnny Herrera's house, was Felix already there? Yes, he was. Prior to the time that the shots rang out, did you ever see Felix with any injuries to the little finger of his left hand? I don't know if it was his finger or not, but I remember seeing an injury on his hand. I do. And how is it that that injury was called to your attention, if you recall? I was at Johnny's house. I was sitting on the couch, and Felix, I guess, went out for something. I don't remember what he went out to his car for, and I seen him walk back in, and I was sitting there, and he asked Marilyn for something to put on his hand, that he had hurt his hand. Marilyn? Yes, sir. He asked her for something to put on his hand, is that correct? Yes. Did he appear to be bleeding at that time? Yes, he had some blood on his hand. No further questions, sir? Excuse me, I'm sorry, Your Honor. May I have just a moment? Go ahead, sir. Mr. Gonzalez, in response to, or to clarify your answer to questions given you by the district attorney, can you think of any circumstance when you would want to put your brother's body in the trunk of a car? No, sir. Or your mother's? No, sir. Can you explain why you answered that you didn't know whether you would when you answered the district attorney's question? Well, I have never been in a predicament like that before. I don't know what I would do. Incidentally, how is it that you knew where the hospital was already? Well, at approximately 2 years ago, I lived in Pico Rivera. I lived on this street in some apartment, the Rivera Apartments. I lived there approximately a year. I am familiar with the hospital. I have taken a friend there before with injuries. No further questions, sir? Mr. Gonzalez, you said that you were never in a predicament like that. Are you saying that if your mother were hurt, that you wouldn't know whether to put her in the back seat or the trunk? Is that what you are saying only because that never happened? First of all, I did not place him in the trunk of my car. But you closed the trunk on him? Yes, I did. You didn't say, hey, let's get him out of here. Let's put him in the back seat of the car and take him to the hospital. Why should we put him in the trunk? He can't breathe. You didn't say that? No. Now the question is, if your mother were hurt somehow or another, would you have any question as to where to put her, in the trunk or the back seat? What are you saying? I am saying that I don't know, sir, because that's never happened to me before. I have never been in a predicament. I don't know what I would do, sir. Tell me, sir, did you know at the time that you were driving off with Raymond's body in the trunk of the car that he had been shot in the head? It appeared that he had been shot in the head, but I wasn't sure. What makes you say that it happened when he had appeared to be shot? Well, after the shots had been fired, I didn't get very close. I was just a few feet away and it was kind of dark, but I remember seeing some blood coming from the side of his mouth. Just from the side of his mouth? Yes, sir. And that's the extent of what you would draw your conclusion, that he was shot in the head? Yes, sir. Did you at any time ever make any determination to find out whether he was still alive when you dumped him out on the street or on the yard there? I didn't examine him, sir. I stood there for a few seconds looking at him. Did you think that if you brought a wounded man into the hospital for treatment that you would get into trouble then? I don't remember thinking that, sir. I didn't think that. Well, if it had been your brother that had been shot, you wouldn't have dumped him off in the street, would you? I don't think I would, sir, to be honest, no. You would have taken him to the hospital, and you wouldn't have figured you would have gotten in any trouble by taking someone to the hospital who was shot under those conditions, would you, if it had been your brother? Probably not. Well, suppose it was Felix who had been shot. Would you have dumped him off in the street? At that point, sir, then I probably would have, yes. How about Johnny? At that point, also, yes, sir, I probably would. Are you known as a homeboy with Johnny? No, sir, our relationship isn't that of it's not a very close relationship. The vehicle